Hi everyone, welcome. Here are the big takeaways from this week's topic on critical thinking about published research. Now in this chapter we depart from learning the specific elements and vocabulary of research methods and we turn our attention to a second skill we'll develop in this course. We examine unique research articles and reports that have built-in methodological mistakes and research design errors for us to find. This will allow us to immediately apply your new knowledge of research design and exercise those critical thinking skills to evaluate the validity of alleged research findings and new facts as they appear and are reported in published research studies. We learn a systematic approach to the critique of research reports and practice these skills in the subsequent weeks in those critical thinking quizzes, critical thinking quiz number 1, 2, 3, and 4 that are coming soon and are listed in your syllabus. You'll discover in your future career, guys, that your professional opinion is based upon your ability to understand research evidence as the bases for decision making and problem solving. It is precisely because so many people do not have this type of understanding that alleged research facts with serious weaknesses or faults can be accepted without question as new knowledge, and that's just wrong for the science. Human service choices, such as which clinical interventions are best in a specific situation, will always be evidence-based and therefore research-based. So let's practice these critical thinking skills about published research. First big takeaway from this chapter. Remember, the threshold for proving cause and effect relationships is very high. We think carefully about information, facts, and scientific discoveries, and we discipline the manner in which we take in that information. Remember, the healthy skeptic looks for evidence. You want the author of the research article to prove their findings to you through empirical, observable, scientific means. Proving cause and effect is difficult because we judge such claims by watching if the author ruled out alternative explanations, also known as extraneous variables. In the PowerPoint slides for this chapter, we start by reviewing past articles about research findings with headlines that seem to suggest cause and effect relationships where there were none, or where it turns out there were other more likely or just better explanations for the observed findings in the headline. Remember, we follow those 3 rules for causation described in Chapter 2 of your textbook. Number 1, covariance. As A changes, B changes. Number 2, temporal precedence. That is, temporal means time. A comes first in time, then B. And number 3, internal validity, and that's the most important one. If an author wants you to believe that A caused B, then they must rule out the existence of other possible causes or alternative explanations for that observed change in B. To remind you, the large majority of psychological research is peer-reviewed and therefore confirmed to be based upon solid evidence. You should respect the most research as out there. Some has faults, and that's why we're learning this skill. Second big takeaway from this chapter, read the sample articles newly assigned this week. Now here we gain some practice at critical thinking by examining unique research articles that have some built-in methodological mistakes and some research design errors for us to find. This is going to preview what you'll see in those critical thinking quizzes in the next a few weeks to come. 4 quizzes coming. Article number 1 is called Mental Illness Overestimated, and it's a research report challenging earlier research findings that mental illness could be found in about 30% of the U.S. population, a number that seemed implausibly high. That's very high. 30% of the U.S. population has mental illness. This article is drawing our attention to ask, well, what do you mean by mental illness? That is, how do you operationally define this term? Remember operational definitions? You'll see that the original study used a weak operational definition that said mental illness was any symptoms of a psychological disorder. And the report, the article I asked you to read, as a better, stronger, more accurate operational definition fits what you may have learned in your abnormal psychology class as symptoms plus discomfort or distress and maybe some level of dysfunction in a person's life. It's not enough to just have a symptom of a mental disorder. That's not the same thing as a mental disorder. So the author is overstating their findings. a mental health advocate wanting to make psychological disorders seem more prevalent than they are would likely choose that first, looser operational definition over the second one, right? And so there's some bias in this reporting. Article number 2, called Survey Backs Working Moms, is a UTSA report of a telephone survey done with a sample of people right here in Bexar County. Notice first about this article that this was a telephone survey to households. And so we have to ask about the sample that's represented in this study. Who in the sample might we be missing out on? Who did the researchers miss out on by choosing to call house phones? Because the researcher has chosen to call household phones, they're going to be likely to oversample people who tend to answer the house phone, and these tend to be older adults. They will tend to undersample, in a study like that, people who do not answer the house phone, or some of them who may not even have a house phone. You may know people that don't even have a house phone, they only have their cell phone. These tend to be younger adults. So in this study, Survey Backs Working Moms, we would expect a non-representative sample because of their choice to call household phones, because opinions often vary across older and younger generations. So, and of course, in this report, a careful look at the questions from the actual survey itself. There's several questions available. They show us the questions they actually asked. It does reveal some poorly worded questionnaire items that do seem somewhat biased, and that does undermine further the validity of these survey results. So, in summary, the big takeaways from this week's topic of critical thinking about published research are these. Number 1, you will discover in your future career that your professional opinion is based upon your ability to understand, read research evidence as the basis for future decision-making and problem-solving. Professional choices in specific situations will always be evidence-based and therefore research-based. And big takeaway number 2, proving cause and effect in research is difficult because we judge such claims by watching if the author ruled out alternative explanations for the observed outcome. Those are known as extraneous variables. Remember to follow those 3 rules for causation: covariance, temporal precedence, and internal validity. And internal validity is the toughest one. Those are the big takeaways, guys, from this week's topic on critical thinking about published research. Thank you, everyone.